Welcome to Switching On Electrified Skills, the podcast that sparks your curiosity and ignites your passion for a career in electrification. I'm Deepak Farmer. Join me on this electrifying adventure where I connect you with industry leaders, visionary education providers, and pioneers driving the electric revolution. Discover the world of skills, jobs, and community, gaining actionable insights, inspiring stories, and the latest developments. Now for a quick announcement, and listeners, this isn't an announcement you want to miss. Switching On Electrified Skills is giving away cutting-edge electric bikes from our top UK manufacturer, EBCO e-bikes. This exciting giveaway is going to run from 19th of December 2023 to 26th of March 2024. Entering to win is simple. Subscribe to the ERS Hub YouTube channel and listen to any podcast episode. Hit the like button and drop a comment on your favorite podcast episode, sharing what you enjoyed most about the episode and why you want an e-bike. And subscribe to our newsletter. For all the details, hurry and head over to the episode description on your preferred podcast platform to find the rules and the terms and conditions. Please take a look at the privacy notice. All participants must be 18 and over to enter and reside in the UK. Participants will be selected by me and my team. Entry is free, with a limited one entry per person. Good luck to you all. The world around us is changing, and we see this more and more as we move to a cleaner, greener future. But the support for that is coming from all angles. At the heart of that, we know that the automotive sector is going to be a huge driver for that. McLaren, who has been working over the last many years to support technological advancements, has been critical in moving that forward. Today, I'm joined by a very important guest, Paolo Bargiacchi, who is the head of product at Electrification at McLaren Applied. And today we're going to really dig into, some of the employer perspective of the things that they see are changing and how that can support the careers and skills of people getting ready to build a workforce ready for that new change. So we'll start by welcoming Paolo. Welcome to us. Thank you, firstly, for joining us and supporting this. I think that it's going to be critical, some of the insights, and we've spoken at length about some of the things that you've been doing and McLaren have been doing. But your history, or career path has been quite diverse, working for JLR, Bentley, and now McLaren. I would love to start off with a career perspective around, what are you seeing in terms of changes or the technological changes you've seen, especially from combustion over to electrification over the last few years? If you can give me just an oversight of that, that would be really good.
Yeah, sure. And firstly, thank you for having me. So one of the ways that we've seen the automotive market in particular developing is in a series of waves. And the first wave was really in about 2008, and that was the early pioneers. Kind of Tesla with their first Roadster, Nissan Leaf, BMW i3, not really mass market cars, but the start of something new. And really it took about 10 years until Wave 2 arrived, which was the mass adoption of EVs, or at least the OEMs making their first wave into the market. So that was about 2018. You had the Jaguar I-Pace, Audi e-tron, Mercedes EQC, all of these being rushed to market. But underneath, from an engineering perspective, it was very much about pulling things kind of off the shelf, using architectures that they already had. And it's only till today, kind of 2023, where we're seeing more of the OEMs move to true electric vehicle architectures, and underneath that, a whole suite of new technology and engineering that supports it. And I think it's that market movement that cascades down into the employment market and the skills that are required. Back in 2008, electrification still wasn't really a thing. So I think people in their careers, the way that they evolve is based on what they see out in the world as they move around. And when you don't have that kind of presence, there's not much of a driver for the skills and industry to develop. So it's always playing catch up a little bit. I think where we are now, we're seeing kind of, yes, electrification kind of develop, but also this advent of the software-defined vehicle. which is becoming a huge differentiator between different products and therefore really important from an employer's perspective. So it's interesting, we've got almost in the market this cascade between kind of experienced engineers, chief engineers that have maybe from an electrification standpoint come from different industries like industrial, where electric machines and drives have been prevalent for decades. And now we've got graduates who see the world of electrification and they are excited to be brought into that market. But there's almost a gap in between the two because 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't much of that presence in automotive. So that's one of the challenges that we face.
For those of us who have been in this space, like yourself and myself, we've seen a gradual change. But the truth is, to the wider market, it's almost suddenly come upon them.
Yep.
Electrification is suddenly there. There's charging points everywhere. Cars are being, used on the roads. And, go back just 2 years ago and you'd see hardly any. But now you're seeing them everywhere. We know it's growing. And the investment that's being made into this space is very important and a good indicator that this is a very much growing space. But just before we start going into the details of this, from a employer, especially an OEM, what do you see as going the future looks like in terms of electrification? Because anyone who's trying to make a career change, I feel, especially the audience, are going to need reassurance that if they go into this and start changing their careers, that actually it's going to be a long-lasting and fruitful career. What reassurances do you feel you can give around, where we're heading?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've now been fortunate enough to work on both sides of the equation, the OEM side and the tier one side. And I guess one of the aspects is that when OEMs are planning their vehicles, first of all, each vehicle kind of development cycle is normally 3 to 4 years of development before it launches. And then that product will be probably a 7-year life cycle from there. But the platforms that they invest in underneath those are meant for decades. And I think then from a supply chain perspective, it's the cascade of those requirements from OEMs that come down and distill what we should be working on to drive the future. Everything that we've seen over the last certainly decade in particular is that electrification is kind of here to stay. I think there's been challenges kind of along that journey that have in some years slowed things down, certainly through the pandemic, and then other years really accelerated things. When you look at kind of the raw physics of it, there's other opportunities that are spoken about at the same time alongside electrification, like hydrogen fuels, for example. But when you look at the kind of well-to-wheel efficiency, it just doesn't stack up. So I think everything from a raw engineering perspective points to that being kind of the best solution. And I think for a career path and longevity, OEMs have spent billions over decades building up their brands and what they stand for and differentiating in different ways. And sometimes that's about the design of the car, the interior, but a lot of the times it's the powertrain. And I don't think that's going to go away. And the whole electric powertrain, at the moment, you could kind of argue that EVs are perhaps a little bit one-dimensional. They can go very fast, especially from low speed, but there's not much character there. I think one of the interesting developments we'll see, certainly over the next decade, is as more EVs are coming into market, again, there's going to be that need to differentiate. So it's going to require top engineering talent across a spectrum of kind of skill sets from hardware to software to be able to dial in some character, some advanced features, and offset that kind of competitive playing field again. So I do think electrification has a long future, certainly firstly in automotive. But I think then the other interesting thing is automotive is just the start, and we're seeing a cascade now to all the other industries, whether it be aviation, true into space, marine, commercial vehicles. It's happening kind of everywhere we turn. So I think it's an exciting long-term prospect.
Yeah, because one thing that we definitely see based on history, all right, is that automotive tends to be a natural driver. and then sort of influences all those other segments that you just mentioned: rail, freight, aerospace, all the things that go around in terms of transport, but also in terms of how energy is produced and stored, and then also from a manufacturing robotics side of things. So it actually affects the whole ecosystem, even though we know that sort of automotive sort of leads the way there. But as these careers are moving forward, and we're seeing more and more technical skills requirements, I guess it's nice to know that that there's a huge longevity here, right, for people that are coming into this space. But around the edges, right, and this is, I would really like to know from a McLaren's point of view and all the organizations that you've worked for, with regards to the skills that are there. We have technical skills that we are obviously trying to support, but what does a HR person, right, in that same organization need to know? What does the marketing person need to know? So we focus on the technical side, but we forget that a business effectively runs with the technical product development and all that sort of stuff that goes on in terms of bringing the product to market. But everything is a business enterprise almost, right? And in that enterprising side, it'd be nice for people to know that there are other roles that are not technical based that will absolutely be required, especially in, like I said, HR, marketing, finance, purchasing, supply chain management, all the other things. What sort of things do you see that are required, or the kind of skill sets that you want in your wider enterprise in McLaren?
Yeah, it's a great point and a really interesting question. I think even myself, I started off in engineering, but my role today isn't really to do with engineering. It's very much a kind of generalist type of role, which interfaces with a lot of the people that you just spoke through. I think one of the things that certainly I've noticed is the overarching story of sustainability, which is why we're moving to electrification, resonates with so many people, no matter what their background is. So I think we can view this a few different ways. Firstly, I think engineering as a skill set is an amazingly broad kind of skill set. Fundamentally, it comes down to you're a problem solver, and you can apply that in lots of different ways. And we see that engineers can go into so many different functions, whether that be product management, like myself. Our current VP of sales was an engineer. You can go into finance, law. Like, there's so many different ways that engineers can move into other kind of roles. Typically, you don't see that coming the other way. You don't see people moving from finance into engineering, so that's quite an interesting dynamic, and I think it's a really good kind of underlying point for why engineering early on is so fundamental. It gives you so many options. But with that wider skill set, I think, as long as you've got that kind of passion that we've spoken about before, you see the story, the compelling reason to move to sustainability, as long as you've got that kind of open growth mindset, most people tend to be able to connect with the why, and then the engineering detail kind of doesn't matter quite so much. So
I think that's such an important point to make, and something that we definitely need to put out in terms of messages, that the engineering side, and I remember talking to you about this article that I'd read a few years ago, that some of the most career successful and top richest people actually studied engineering, because actually it gives you such a wide portfolio of skills that you can move into different spaces as you feel passionate about. Not necessarily, has to be that technical route. As you mentioned, our director of sales is from an engineering background. He didn't set out to be that, but actually that's the path that he's taken because that's where he wanted to go. And I think that those decisions that are being made early on in careers are so important. But more importantly, early on in education is another huge area where decisions are being made. Because, asking the question of, do you want to be an engineer or what are you passionate about, are two different questions. And I would like to dig into, a young you, right? Where you started from, go back to, hopefully not too far, right? In terms of when you were young, what made you, or what gave you the trigger to say, that's what I want to do?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. I think when you rewind to that age, typically it starts when you haven't even done your GCSEs yet. and you're already having to think ahead and select what you want to do at A level, which then informs what you want to do at university. And for me, that first step was kind of just play to your strengths, which was kind of maths and physics, and that's what I did at A level. But then when I was right, okay, what's next? What do I want to do at university? It was just looking around at, okay, what am I interested in? And for me, that was cars and motorsport.
Yes.
And probably shouldn't admit this now that I work at McLaren, but because of my Italian heritage, I was a massive Ferrari fan. And it was the Formula One and watching that, and Schumacher, when I was growing up, it was that's what got me excited. And when I started researching, I'll admit, before that, I didn't really know what a mechanical engineer was or what they did. But there was a really great resonance between that kind of skill set that you could learn at university and then onward opportunities, which for me, it was all about, I want to work at a car company or in motorsport. And I remember when I went to tell my parents, like, I think I want to do mechanical engineering at university, my mum kind of frowned and thought that meant that I wanted to be a mechanic. And I think, the engineering term isn't protected in this country like it is in some others, like Germany and the US, where it can be used very loosely, and it can mean anything from kind of a more technician, tradesperson type role through to, a very lab-based role and anywhere in between. So I think, there's this kind of underlying exposure to what does engineering actually mean that we can really improve. But for me, that was the path I wanted to take. I did that at university, and there were kind of two actions, I guess, that started forming my path. Firstly was to get engaged with Formula students at university, which is where you basically design, build and race a single-seat car against other universities from around the world. Again, kind of, for me, it was really important to build on the academic side with some practical implementation. And I coupled that with a summer placement at Jaguar Land Rover in their powertrain research and development team. And it was there that at the time I was all about combustion engines and, turbochargers and that path, because this
Loud
was
noises.
this was before, wave one in the electrification space. So it wasn't very prevalent. But it was when I joined JLR, started to get exposure to kind of some of the R&D work that they were doing around, firstly, hybrids, and then further afield looking at electrification. And when I joined there as a graduate, I think one of the good things that they did, which employers absolutely, I would encourage them to do, is arrange graduate schemes where people get exposed to different elements of the business, and that kind of had a split. There was different functions within engineering, which was great for engineers to see, and see different departments and see how they resonated with them, but also non-engineering departments. So one of the placements that I did was in product marketing, and that was maybe what started to shift my path, not out of true engineering to a more kind of generalist type role, which was then looking at the commercial side of things. Maybe, if I'm completely honest, also when I was looking around the engineering department, thinking, there's a lot of people here that are better than me at engineering. Where can I find, what my strength is? And I think what that's turned out to be is being quite good at several different things rather than really, really good at one individual thing. And that kind of led me down a path moving from JLR's powertrain research to their propulsion planning, which was then looking ahead and starting to look at electrification, Jaguar I-Pace, the next generation of vehicles, how they would integrate hybrids and do that whole transition. And from there, I kind of took that a step further and went beyond just powertrain, looking at the whole vehicle, and did kind of whole vehicle product management, product planning, and took that and went to Bentley Motors, and kind of did very similar there, working on their Mulliner range of products, which is like their special vehicles. But at that kind of time, at the end of that period, I was maybe getting a bit of an itch back for the powertrain world. And also I wanted to see what life was like on the other end of the equation. So everything to date had been OEMs. And then I moved to McLaren Applied, which is a tier one supplier with a rich kind of motorsport background, but that do work in lots of other industries as well, including automotive.
That's brilliant. So really fruitful career there. But I can hear in your voice the passion you've had at different points, and what you've learned and how you've stepped forward, and the love for what you do. And I guess if I put you in a scenario where you're now standing in front of a classroom of 30, right, 11 and 12-year-olds, and you've got a group of mixed students now, right, and what would you want them to understand from the word engineering? What perception of engineering should they have, right, at this age right now?
I honestly think to boil it down to problem solving is one of the best ways to go about it. And that problem solving can be applied to just so many different things. I think all of these different skills or functions that we mentioned, they could go into, whether that be marketing, sales, they are all fundamentally about solving some sort of problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think telling stories about how that problem solving can be applied is what really makes people resonate with things. So that story that resonates with someone is going to be different for everyone. Of course, some of the main ones are about just generally how can we improve the world going forward. And if a key kind of megatrend within that is sustainability, that's where that kind of electrification pathway could come in at a later stage when they're kind of more advanced in their STEM journey. But absolutely, for me, it's about showing them that engineering just means solving problems, and that can be a bunch of different things. And the more you apply it rather than make it theoretical, I think that helps.
Excellent. And as an employer, we've seen there's a lot of change going on at the moment. Change for an organization like McLaren or JLR will always be managed structurally, and will be invested in, and that sort of thing. But what sort of resonates out from that, right, into the bigger ecosystem, right, is that everybody's trying to figure out how they fit in. Mm-hmm. What challenges, firstly, do you feel that you're having at the moment in terms of getting the right people and the right talents, and what are you doing to try to put a hand out and say, look, we can help you, right, in terms of coming closer to our sectors?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think I struggled with that myself a little bit, with making the adaptation from the kind of mechanical engine-based world to electrification. Mm-hmm. There was a lot for me to try and learn and wrap my head around. And one of the things that Jaguar Land Rover ran was a technical accreditation scheme where everyone could sign up to do paid for master's level but modules. Mm-hmm. That could be different things. Amongst those was a hybrid sustainable vehicle powertrains one that I did at Loughborough, and that absolutely helped kind of with that transition. At McLaren Applied now, what we see is that there's definitely less abundance of skills in areas like power electronics, quite specific engineering roles where you need the experience as well as just the core academic kind of background. And for us, I guess we try to approach our skills shortage problem in a couple of different ways. Firstly, having the brand name McLaren Applied helps. I think you have to recognise that lots of engineers are going to want to work with a brand like that naturally implies you've got other excellent engineers, because I think that's one of the things with engineers. There's a lot of teamwork involved.
Yes. So
knowing that you can work with other people that are really pushing their own boundaries is a good start. But beyond that, we do try to do a lot of kind of encouragement of STEM, and that ranges at different levels. So that can be going into schools, to kind of local schools, to promote adoption. We ran a kind of placement opportunity type project where we had students come in for a week, shadow kind of our engineering team so they can get more exposure of what that looks like. So we have those. We've obviously got our learning and development budget, but then also it's just generally going out and trying to do talks, put posts online for people to see. We try to do some case studies around a day in the life of our engineers and what it means. But I think one of the bits that we're still struggling with is the pure skills and experience shortage in some of those key areas like power electronics.
Okay, and you said something there, a day in a life as in an engineer. There's still this perception, especially in engineering, that you are being asked to work in a dusty, dark environment where you've got huge amounts of industrial machinery and you're almost a ghost in there somewhere, right, trying to do something. But that's not the case. But actually, it'd be nice to hear from yourself what that environment looks like when you started your career and what that environment also looks like today. You know, when people are coming to this space, it'll be nice for our audience, you know, people who are looking at careers and trying to work in this space, to understand, what does a day look like, right? What does that feel like? What are the team, the people, and the social element of being in that environment? What drives you to continue working with this space? It's a deep question there.
Yeah. So for your first part, I guess you're absolutely right. Mostly an engineer, their work is going to be a lot of office-based work, which maybe you don't expect, and obviously that's kind of always progressing over time. But a pretty standard office, your computers, it's very technology-based, and that's there. I guess the bit that's changed mostly is then the practical side. So when the kind of engineering, computer design work translates to physical testing, that environment has changed a bit. So certainly when I started and it was, engine calibrations and production facilities, I'll be honest, they were still a lot cleaner, quieter than you would maybe expect, not industrial, quote unquote, with dark, dingy, smoky. It was really high tech, and I think that's the thing. The technology's been there for a while, where dyno facilities, everything, with health and safety, it's pristine. But moving to electrification, that's got a whole new step more in terms of you've taken a lot of the combustion and the smoke that comes with that, and all of those, ventilation aspects. So that's all gone away. They're typically very quiet kind of dynos. The bit that I think in terms of, you said kind of almost like the motivation to
what keeps you there,
keep going.
Why not go and do something else?
Yeah, for me, I think at least personally, it's always been about coming back to the application, the end application. It's great having this theoretical problem, and that's why I was never, I didn't want to do pure maths, for example, or pure physics. I always wanted to kind of apply those to a real world scenario. And I think a lot of engineers follow that same mindset. And it gets really kind of rewarding when the computer design work translates into, firstly, physical samples that you start then testing in the lab. And you can say, what I engineered, that's actually coming true. I can see this level of performance. And then certainly for the tier one perspective, it's then when you get customers and implement that product into their wider vehicle or whatever it is, and then you can see that vehicle launch and you're like, oh, I was a part of that. And then when it was on the OEM side, it's even easier to be rewarding because you can work directly on something that's then on the road, highly desired by millions of people around the world. You can see that certainly with the shift to electrification as well, all of the societal impacts that it's had. So as CO2 consumption is coming down, air quality is improving, there's lots of rewarding factors because it is something tangible that you're working towards.
I see the drivers in terms of why you stay there. But what about, the other things? Now, and I say this in a loose term because people today, right, who want to work and have a career, there's more to it. They want to have a good team, right? They want to talk to people. They want to go out for drinks later. They want a fun environment, right? There's a technical side and there's the development and there's the application. People want to have fun in where they work. What's that like at McLaren?
Yeah, that's interesting because one of my fears before joining McLaren Applied was the perception that I had maybe about old McLaren. Ron Dennis era McLaren, which had a perception of being very strict, quite dry, very laser focused. Thankfully, that's changed a lot, and it's far more approachable now. We are kind of a smaller company. We've tried to embrace the more dynamic, laid back, a startup style approach, even though we're not a startup. Embracing hybrid working is a really interesting one as well. Different people have different, life organization problems. Like some people, it's logistics. Some people, it's the family that they need to be back for to take care of, kids, etc. So one of our guys, he lives in Spain. And one of the things that works for him is he's works remote for 3 out of the 4 weeks a month, comes in, gels with his team for the week. They spend a lot of time together. They do some stuff outside of work, and then he moves back. And that's, the situation that works for him. And I think the thing that's important is flexibility as an employer and catering to the demands and what the values are of the people that you're employing, which can be very different. For some, it is the extroverted things that you've mentioned, going out, having that kind of local camaraderie. But for others, they may be more introverted and they care more about flexibility and their family obligations, and being able to cater towards both of those. I think we try to do a reasonably good job at, and personally, I would say, I'm pretty happy with how we run those.
And if there was a message that you wanted to give to your supply chains, right, to all the ecosystem that works, with McLaren, because I know there's quite a big breadth of that, and they're looking for skills too. They're looking for people to stay with them. They're looking to retain people, right? What would you say to them in terms of learning from the stuff that McLaren is doing to keep people?
Well, that one is particularly interesting because you then go into the global playing field, and once you go into that playing field, you then have to look at what are the kind of nationwide strategies and governmental strategies that they're doing to encourage their workforce population, the skill sets that they want to focus on. And there's a huge diversity kind of across the world based on that. For us, I think it does come back to this point of flexibility. Certainly even in skills that we're looking for from people, there's been numerous studies about how kind of a diversity of a team, you might look at the people individually and rank them higher or lower, but actually that when they come together from different ends of the spectrum, the synergy is there that makes the whole team better and that kind of thing. So I think embracing that kind of mindset, but also for us, it's really important to have good dialogue with our supply chain.
Okay.
So what we don't want is them developing their organizations and the skill sets that they need to meet their objectives out of sync with kind of what we want and ultimately what the OEMs, the end customers want. So I think open dialogue is really important, establishing kind of key relationships and making sure that the strategies are fairly open and talked through rather than this kind of closed roadmap that then something plonks out at the end. I think we've definitely seen the most success from collaboration.
Okay, excellent. So look, I'm a new person to this industry, right? I've been doing various different things, right? What are you looking for on my CV to be part of your team?
For me, I think there's a couple of things. The character side is really important. And for us, that means somebody who is, you could say passionate, but just more than that is willing to keep pushing themselves, I think is the key thing. We're not particularly interested in people that are stagnating because we know that the market and the technology and everything is moving so rapidly. So you really have to adopt a kind of a growth mindset where you're willing and keen to kind of push yourself, push your teammates, and achieve excellence in some form. So I think that mindset type approach is really important. Then from a skill set, it really does vary because we want people from the kind of top end of the engineering tree, like chief engineers that have rich experience, that we can look at their leadership qualities as well as their more kind of strategic elements. What have you done to kind of consider roadmaps and how they align between different sets of requirements? But all the way through then to, you need those people that lead, but you also need the people that do. And you could split that again into two: someone who's maybe mid-career, who's got some experience but is still working towards being more strategic, so they're like an excellent operational person.
Yeah.
And then you've got people earlier in their career where it's more about pushing the norms, challenging assumptions that have been there. It's really easy to get stuck in your own ways, and I think the best way to avoid that is encouraging new people to come through and just think through things differently. So it really does depend. I don't think there is any one type of person, and it comes back to deliberately try to consider firstly your own kind of unconscious biases, but getting variety in the team that you are building together.
Excellent. So that comes back to a question around diversity, right? And as you know, from a very young age, we know, and being a teacher myself, I've seen it over the years, going into engineering and careers, I've seen it all the time, that there is a huge gap in gender, right? It's it's pretty much dominated at the moment by males. But yet, when we look back at the question when I asked you what you would say to a classroom, we're looking for problem solvers, people who can, really figure it out and are driven. Now, half of that population is female. What would you like to see done more of to close that gap? Now, we talked about this the other day, and you gave a very good example about, I think it was in Switzerland or in Swiss, that they were doing something different. What are your suggestions in trying to close that gap?
Yeah, so that specific example was looking at, again, coming back to our point of you need tangible things in the world to kind of relate to. And at the moment, I think the growth rate of women in engineering in the UK is something like 0.5% per year. So really, really slow considering we're around 10%. And I was speaking to, I think he was the chief digital officer of Volvo, and he was saying how in Sweden they had a very deliberate push for more women in engineering, but once they were also in engineering, promoting them through the roles, so that they got into kind of management positions that were more visible. And he kind of admitted that it was almost a bias then positively for women, but it was kind of a short-term targeted effort to get more women into engineering, and then they backed off. And once there was kind of more representation in the workplace, it was a self-fulfilling kind of cycle. So it was really a good example of how there was a problem of not having kind of the role models there to inspire girls, from the ages of 5 and 6 when you start school to carry on STEM all the way through, their careers. So that was a really interesting kind of example of the action that you do need to take to overcome this really slow rate of improvement, which we've got here in the UK. It's difficult to do. One of the things that we're doing is we do try to encourage a lot of women in STEM and engineering and motorsport. We've got multiple kind of avenues that we work on this. So we sponsor events for women in engineering where we create then awards to just shine the spotlight a little bit more on some of the amazing women that we do have in engineering and what they're delivering. I think it's great that even an example like Formula One and Sky Sports, that they've started to bring in both women racing drivers and previous kind of strategy engineers from the racing teams into the kind of commentary panel to, again, kind of promote it. I think it really is a source problem when you think about the kind of the funnel of talent coming through. At the moment in our position as an employer, we're kind of right at the bottom of the funnel trying to select from the applications we get. And it's, if we only get 10% of applicants that are female, your room for maneuver to get more women into engineering is pretty low. So it's really about trying to address the top of that funnel, the hopper, and that goes back to the work in schools, having visible role models in the space, and really increasing the amount of women that go into engineering subjects and then promoting them once they are in there.
I think that's a really good thing we need to actually address, because we've almost done a positive bias, right, as a temporary solution to then encourage a ecosystem, right, where it naturally encourages the females to be able to see. What we're getting is that they're now seeing these people working in industry. They become representative of the workplace, and they then can inspire to that. I mean, my daughter, who's 11, and she loves to make things and build things, and she's always doing this. But her draw, it tends to be fashion. It's because she can see models and fashion and all this stuff daily on television or on YouTube or wherever it is. We don't see that, right, being represented in engineering as much. But if we were able to flourish that with that positive bias, actually we're creating opportunity for role models to be represented. Then you can start making that organic sort of growth in trying to balance the diversification. Because the fact is that I believe, as a head of innovation, that innovation is done best when it's diverse, right? You don't choose an engineer in the team because they're an engineer. You choose them because they're good at solving problems. You choose a project manager because they're good with people. You choose a director not because they can direct, it's because they have a vision, right? And these things, I think, are deeper, right, than that front layer. One final question before we close off is that what would you like to see happening in the future, right? What is your ideal team or goals of innovation start looking like when we're trying to create the right teams and the right workforce for your organization?
For me, it comes back to the kind of the flywheel effect, like you said, and then the onus being on kind of the employer. So what you would really like to get to is a situation where the best person for the job gets the job, but because we've done a better job at filling the top of the funnel, that naturally gives you that diversity. Excellent. Because that's going to naturally represent the best array of skill sets. Like you said, different roles require different skills, but even different engineering roles working together require different skills and different viewpoints and different approaches, and there'll be nuances towards some engineers are better to work with customers, some are better to work in silo, and that whole breadth of versatility, for me, it should come out as who is just naturally the best fit for that role. And to do that, it'll be, addressing the foundational problem of the source of talent coming through.
There's one question I want to ask, and I think my audience will kill me if I don't, ask it. When you get a CV, what do you want to see on the CV?
It's a good question.
What gets their foot in the door before you can even judge whether they are driven or they're passionate or anything like that? What do you want to see on the CV?
It's it does come back to the type of role that we're hiring for again. So like I said, I think you want different types of characters for different roles and different maturities in the career. What I would be looking for in particular is someone who's been given an opportunity and overachieved, whatever that opportunity was. And I think the more that you can make that numerical in your CV, measured impact, that will stand you apart. So anytime you are assigned a task, or even better, if you proactively sought out a task, created an opportunity, went above and beyond, and then had XYZ measurable impact, that's what really stands you apart in my eyes. And that's the kind of proactive nature that we look for that kind of McLaren character.
Oh, there you go. So for the audience, you've heard it from McLaren themselves, right? That's what they're looking for. And thank you for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation and a huge amount of insight into the perspective of how the industry is moving, all right, and the kind of things that we want to be seeing, but also in terms of suggestions for, the employers and the supply chains and what they should be doing more of and how we can be doing better to close those gaps in terms of creating the right teams and the right workforce for our objectives as organizations.
I think on that basis, there's a massive onus on employers and the supply chain to be flexible in your requirements and look more for, as much as you can, for kind of character and transferable skills, and then put in place kind of additional structure, support, or additional learning to fill any gaps that is coming through. I think it's really important to not have a narrow mindset when you're hiring, that they must fill this box exactly right, because you're going to miss so much by doing that. So I think focus on core skills and then put things in place to help them develop to meet any gaps that are there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paolo. That has been really insightful.
Thank you for joining me on this electrifying episode of Switching On Electrified Skills podcast. Together, we'll shape a future that is powered by electricity. If you would like to learn more about electrification and explore courses and jobs, please visit ershub.co.uk or connect with us via social media channels. Thank you once again for joining me today. Until next time, keep charging ahead and unleash the full potential of your electrifying skills.